My weight was 140 kilos as a teenager. I was the person no one wanted to have on their team because I'm fat and I'm bad at sports. It's tough for me to think back on the time. I think about the kids today, and I just hope that they will never experience the pain and the suffering that I did. I want to make a change. I joined a patient organization that have some online conversations with people living with obesity. It's a safe place so they can talk. I want to give back. We must stop fat shaming. And I want Novo Nordisk to be part of this change.
Even today, we see misconceptions, we see stigma around obesity. We are also a little bit happy to say that, spearheaded by Wegovy, supported by Select, the dialogue of is obesity a disease? Does it need to be treated? Is changing. I think that's supported by numbers. We know obviously obesity is increasing, and that is globally. A lot of countries are trying to catch up to the US in a bad way. And when I in the slide show that we're expecting to exceed 1 billion by 2030, actually numbers are coming out suggesting that we are getting there already this year. So it's big. And we also know that obesity is associated with a great number of comorbidities in the metabolic space, in the cardiovascular space, but also in the mechanic space, so to speak. Life expectancy, if you suffer from obesity, is substantially and fundamentally decreased. This is exemplified on the right hand of the slide. If you are age 46 today, likelihood if you have normal BMI of reaching age 70 is 80%. If you just have BMI between 35 and 40, it's down to 60%, and if you exceed 40 in BMI, it's down to 50%. This is a serious chronic disease in need of intervention. The overlap between obesity, and I think from a pathophysiological perspective, if you really try to simplify it, obesity is the starting point. That basically means there's a huge overlap between obesity and diabetes, but also obesity and cardiovascular disease, obesity in this space, also heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But we'll later in the day also show other comorbidities, including chronic renal disease and kidney disease. Our focus has and will be on weight loss. That's the fundamental of first intervention of obesity. We started out with Saxenda, then we went on to 17% weight loss with semaglutide. And obviously we've already a little bit discussed what we believe the amylin biology can do, starting out with CagriSema. But on the other side of the slide, the outcomes becomes incredibly important for the individual patient, for payers, for regulators, and for broader society. If we boil it down and include the comorbidities, obesity is one of the most expensive diseases that we have in society today. That's why we like Select. A lot of you have talked about the primary endpoint of Select. We saw a 20% decrease in risk of myocardial infarction, stroke, or cardiovascular death. We can talk a lot about that. And there were some questions on number needed to treat. I think just looking at the primary endpoint is honestly too simplistic. Because we also in Select saw a decrease in cardiovascular death, albeit not statistically significant, a substantial decrease in heart failure, almost 20%, an almost 20% decrease in risk of all-cause mortality, a more than 20% reduction in kidney risk, It basically means that we can assume kidney benefits for not only patients with diabetes, but also for patients with obesity. And a 73% reduction in diabetes. It doesn't really stop there. In SELECT, we also looked at more comorbidities, but these are maybe some of the big ticket items also from a health economic perspective. In a post-hoc analysis, if I allow myself to pool this, we can actually show a 37% risk reduction being on semaglutide versus placebo. If you want to translate that into number needed to treat, after the first year, number needed to treat is 45 people on the primary endpoint alone. Sorry, 45 people after 4 years. But if I look at the composite endpoint, after the first year, it's 20 people. If I look at 4 years, which is what constitutes a chronic disease, it's 9 people. These are staggering numbers. We can make a true impact for patients living with obesity with a really, really great intervention. It's no doubt that SELECT is an incredibly strong tool. We also received a question on that in the previous section. But we've seen this in more than one trial. I've talked about the STEP-HFpEF trials a couple of times. I'm again not allowed to show you the actual data from just the STEP-HF trials because we are still aiming to publish those in a prestigious journal. But if I allow myself to just show you the pool of STEP-HFpEF and SELECT, and STEP-HFpEF are really a very well-defined population. In SELECT, we pool heart failure with reduced ejection fraction and heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But in STEP-HFpEF, we only look at heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. But if I allow myself to pool the data, we show that we can reduce the hospitalization, very expensive hospitalization for heart failure, with 58%. If I look also at cardiovascular mortality, we look at a 39% reduction. These are really, really strong data. And those of you who go into the numbers can probably imagine what we will actually see coming out from the individual STEP-HF trials. This is why I'm doing drug development. You saw Isabel this morning. She had heart failure. More specifically, she had heart failure with preserved ejection fraction. That's a disease that is closely associated with obesity. And she described what being on this drug meant for her in terms of her everyday life. But we can now also tell her that we can reduce her risk of going to hospital and reduce her risk of premature death. This is why we do business. And to talk about how we do this in the commercial space, I'm super happy to invite Camilla to the stage.
Thank you, Martin. Thank you. Yeah, thanks a lot, Martin. And there is no doubt that with Wegovy and the data that we have provided from clinical development and research, we have been able to truly unlock the diabetes market. And we have also been able to reach our strategic aspiration, as Lars mentioned this morning, and this will not stop us from progressing further. As you see now, Wegovy and Saxenda together is 18% of our total sales. And at the same time, of course, we are also looking at what is the total unexploited potential. You see here, and Martin talked to it, there are more than 800 million people living with obesity, and we are treating around 1 million. So there has been a number of changes that we have been working on before the launch of Wegovy, but that we've also seen materializing after the launch of Wegovy. And I'd just like to take you through sort of 3 elements of that. With regards to patients, before the launch of Wegovy, we saw that patients were in doubt. Is there help to get? Should I just exercise more and eat less? Is that all I can do? They were used to that message from physicians. But now we know that the obesity market is driven by people showing up at the physician's office, and a big part of the prescriptions are driven by patients asking for more help. So that is a significant change. We also saw before that the stay time and adherence was relatively low with Saxenda, but we see now, because of expectations to longer weight management, and because, of course, also affordability, access, and also about the efficacy in itself, that there will be a longer and longer stay time, and we see very significant and very good improvements in that. At the same time, with prescribers, it's not long ago that not every physician was reflecting on whether to prescribe obesity products or not. They mainly would not be doing that. But since after the launch of Wegovy, just in 3-4 years, we've seen that the number of physicians prescribing are up 5-fold approximately. So it's just to say that more and more physicians are now truly considering prescribing obesity medication, and guidelines are also still improving, yet of course that takes a little longer time. When it comes to payers, Doug and Mike will be talking to this in a minute about how, of course, also access has significantly improved in many parts of the world, not only with Wegovy, but we've even seen it accelerate also with Saxenda in recent years. So the understanding of why to treat obesity is much greater than what it was just a few years back. As I said, this should not stop us and think that we will be able to solve all problems in terms of potential. We are going to continue to expand our pipeline. We now have the only molecule that has cardiovascular proven benefits in Wegovy. We are looking at pipeline innovations, of course, also that Martin will be talking to a little bit later, both in the injectable but also in the oral space. And then in addition to having a great pipeline and great innovations, great efficacy, great convenience for patients, what is equally important due to the size of the numbers in the obesity space is the ability to scale, the ability to bring this product to many, many, many patients. And you heard from Henrik this morning how we are planning to be able to do that. And that in itself is, of course, in this space with such a big potential, a strong competitive advantage. We are also aware of the fact that some people living with obesity are not able to pay for some of the innovations. So when we are rolling out Wegovy and when we are reflecting on how we can support them best, we also have allocated volumes to the most vulnerable patients. And of course, we are also looking to seek reimbursement in more and more countries, not for everyone, but for parts of the populations and segments where we have a good dialogue with payers on the cost effectiveness, as we spoke to earlier. And then we are adjusting our commercial model to also reflect on how can we better support patients when this is now a pull market, a patient-driven demand that is out there. And this, of course, also has to do with online opportunities and other ways to support patients. And then finally, before I hand over to Doug, just wanted to share with you that we know from SELECT that the cost effectiveness of treating with semaglutide 2.4 compared to our Saxenda population and the step 1 population is significantly better and up to twice as effective. And we also see that when we then look at subpopulations from the SELECT trial, we see that the cost effectiveness is even stronger than that. So, of course, when we are looking to having these discussions with payers and policymakers, then it is very important data to have. And as you see on the bottom here, we talked about it earlier in the diabetes section, the questions around cost effectiveness now do not only look at weight loss and surrogate endpoints, but truly look at some of the events that we have very clear and significant data on. So CV events, fatal events, hospitalization, and so on, and the sustained weight loss. So all of that means that we have a great starting point for having discussions with payers on the SELECT population, of course. And so with that, I'd like to hand over again to Doug to explain a little bit about how we are doing this in the US.
Thank you, Camilla, again. So maybe as a starting point, I'd tell you that in over 30 years in the life science industry, although challenging, this is the most, I'd say, exciting and rewarding disease state that I've ever participated in. And I say that whether it's coming from family members that are impacted or the concern I have actually for my own country, as Martin alluded to, with our population growing to, in the next couple of years, could be almost 50% of the population that is clinically obese. It's a health crisis that needs intervention, and we have a product that can help. It's called Wegovy. So how did that product do in the US? So even with supply constraints last year, Wegovy performed extraordinarily well. You could argue it was one of the best launches that we've ever had in the US. It's the second largest contributor to growth. As you can see, it added 23 billion DKK, and we're very pleased with the performance. What I was also happy to indicate on the full year earnings was that we started releasing more product into the market of the starting doses. As you all know, something that was critically important to us last year was continuity of care. So to make sure that patients that started on Wegovy could stay on Wegovy. So we reduced the starting doses into the market. So we're very happy to re-release them in early February. And the first couple months of February, we've seen an impact already at MBRX, and we're excited about that. But it is about patients. So whether we heard from Isabella or 2 years ago, if you remember, Lars interviewed a patient called Lisa who participated in our clinical trials. And although they always reference weight, some of the things they also talk about are the simple things in life. Climbing up to the top of the stairs. Lisa talked about playing tennis again. Going for a walk, things that many of us may take for granted. So for us, the narrative is moving away from just absolute weight into more health in life. And we feel confident, and you've heard this all morning, about the hard outcomes data that we're going to see or are seeing in SELECT, that we have the product that can talk about that. That can it could not only help the patients, but it can be a competitive advantage for us. It's excited to get that out. Now, these are the characteristics of what we see in patients today, and what I'll have you zoom in on is the comorbidities. Again, maybe another proof source here, which is if you look at the Wegovy patients today, again, it's skewing toward female. You can see the average age, the BMI, but over half the patients have 2 or more comorbidities, and a third have 3 or more. So we know we have to take this discussion beyond just absolute weight, and that's what we're doing. What we also see, and I know we get a lot of questions, so maybe I'll just address it now on stay time. Because of the supply constraints that we've had, it's very hard to get to an exact number. But what I can tell you is that Saxenda's at 4 to 5 months. Wegovy is greater than 6 months, so it's directionally in a good place, and we believe that will get better over time. What we also see, importantly, that over 30% of the patients are staying on the product for over a year. Now, some of the 3 pillars that I've talked to you about over the years have been activating patients, and Camilla alluded to that. We see more patients being activated. It's market access and reimbursement, and it's also prescribers. We just simply, over the years, we've needed more prescribers. So last year, we more than doubled our footprint in the US, and in essence, doubled our call plan. And you can see, if you go back to 2022, we had about 90,000 prescribers, and then 2023 is 179,000. So we are making progress. Now, you hear pull market a lot, and as evidenced by the middle of this, we do see that the prescriptions coming from, in essence, non-called on are greater than what we see in called on. So the good news is more patients like Lisa and Isabella are getting the courage to go speak to their physicians about weight and what they can do about it. So that's good. But what we also know and what we see from the data is that we're seeing twice as many prescriptions come from the called on doctors. So what that tells us is that dialogue that we're having around education and all the components within that are still very important. So market development and education is important. That's why we had field sales teams, medical educators, medical liaisons, the market access teams, et cetera, which we will continue to deploy. What we also do is we don't leave the non-called on universe alone. We have a lot of information that we give, both that's in the for consumers and HCPs, and we will continue those efforts. One of them is Rethink Obesity. It's a non-branded campaign for awareness for HCPs. I'm happy that recently we hired I'd say a top executive last year from a competitive life science company to come in and continue to transform marketing. And so these programs and services will continue in our called on and our non-called on universes, and we're proud of the efforts that we're making there. So lastly is market access, something that is near and dear. We are pleased, and we've said this over time, with the 50 million patients that currently have access to Wegovy today. What that correlates to, as you can see, is 80% of the patients are paying $25 or less. So it's working. Are we satisfied? No. We're going to continue these efforts. As you can see, we're going to have some opt-outs. Unfortunately, that does happen, and that's not good for patients. But we're seeing a lot more opt-ins, and so the net effect is we're adding more lives year over year. And they are coming in various federal channels as well as states and certainly a commercial market. And lastly, what I would say is that we do believe that with SELECT, this does add to the body of evidence that we have. That body of evidence we use all the time, to the question I just got earlier. We are going to use it with Medicare. I'm not saying that Medicare is going to reimburse overnight. There may be an opportunity through CV, but it does add to the body of evidence, so we're very pleased that we have it, and we're going to continue to make sure that market access is front and center. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mike.
Thank you very much.
Yep.
Doug's numbers are so good, he starts stuttering. Hadn't seen that before. I actually, in that context, as he was showing his numbers, I was a little bit trying to think, how can I excite you with my numbers? He showed 29 billion worth of Wegovy sales, and I have 2 only. And then I thought the way actually to look at this slide, it's almost a copy and paste of Doug's slides on the left-hand side. The way to look at this is that although the bars are much smaller in number and the colors are reversed, look at it in the context again of IO and maybe Saxenda. Saxenda was launched in 2015 in IO, and we have it in 76 markets. And in 2021, we did 3 billion with that. Wegovy in the first year launched with capped volumes in less than a handful, did 2 billion. So as we get going with Wegovy, as the supply will come, as the launches will be released from their caps, this is going to get big. It's going to get very, very big. Where we have actually Wegovy now are the 8 flags you see, the 8 markets where we have launched them. There are very special launches. We don't have a big launch event like usual. We don't go to all the different targeted doctors. We segment which doctor, which institute, which hospital should be prescribing the medications, and we really make sure that the right people get the product first and foremost as we launch and go forward with these. I could not bring all the examples of all the markets, there's not enough time, but I thought that actually in order to give you a bit of a contrast to the US picture that Doug showed, I take this market, Denmark, and give you a bit of an insight on how the product is available in Denmark. Then you could see on one side of the slide, of course, the TRXs per month that you can take a look, but the 7% I think is quite important to look. 7% of the obese population in Denmark right now is on Wegovy, or you can make the calculation differently. If you take the total population of Denmark, 1.5% of Denmark is on Wegovy. We have never seen a product like that, ever. Then on the other side, their numbers very similar to Doug's, a little bit up and down. The 71% female is a little bit less than what Doug showed. The 36 BMI, I think Doug showed 38. Very, very similar. 8% comorbidity is also very similar. The difference is on the last part of the slide. Fully out-of-pocket payments. Wegovy right now is out-of-pocket in international operations, 7 or 8 markets that we have launched. People are willing to pay for it. So there is, of course, a lot of pressure on the healthcare professionals, on the GPs that have to prescribe these products. And then there is this other thing that says inequality in health, where we really need to pay attention to as we expand in IO. Inequality in health, because even if you take Denmark, a highly developed, high GDP per capita country, and look at the prescriptions, then you see some differences. A lot of the prescriptions are coming from North Zealand, where the more affluent people are living. So as we go much, much broader into emerging markets with this, we have to really make sure that we don't leave anyone behind and we cover everyone. And one way to do that is to really make sure, besides, of course, acknowledging that out-of-pocket will play a very big role in this type of a product for a long, long time, we need to double down on reimbursement. With Saxenda, we actually did pretty well. 20% of the population that was getting Saxenda in IO was reimbursed. 80% was out of pocket. Early signs with Wegovy are also good. We have made a good forward leap in our dialogues and discussions with the government of UK. Actually, last week, Switzerland reimbursed the product, and we're in good dialogues with the other countries as well, and we will do so as we launch into more and more places. And of course, what will help reimbursement is data. SELECT is fantastic starting point to have the discussion with the various different people. And more data and more pipeline will excite all of us. And who better to talk about that than Martin?
Thank you very much, Mike. Obviously, we can't talk obesity without also talking about the clinical pipeline. You heard about our philosophy on doing research development approaching obesity from Marcus. Obviously, we have to look at the weight loss. We have to look at the comorbidities. We have to look at the healthy weight loss, securing that we are preserving the right proportion of lean body mass. We have to look at maintenance. And then obviously we have to discuss safety and tolerability. I just want to make one comment that I didn't make before on SELECT. The amount of safety data that we have on the semaglutide molecule from diabetes and obesity at this point in time is second to none. And every time we do a major placebo-controlled outcomes trial, we confirm the safety profile of semaglutide. That is, in and of itself, an incredible differentiator. And obviously, we aim to continue that journey, having a very high focus on safety and tolerability of our anti-obesity medication. Marcus also talked to the dosing frequency, and we'll discuss that more also at later meetings. We are really, really happy with having a broad, deep, and differentiated pipeline. I'm going to come back to discuss my love for the amylin biology also in this space. But just on this slide, I may want to point out, first of all, that we expect regulatory approval in US, but also in Europe for the SELECT label update that we submitted during second half of last year. And that will happen in a not so distant future. I also want to call out the 7.2 milligram that will read out in second half of this year. Our models tells us that without compromising on safety and tolerability, we can actually expect around a 21% weight loss with 7.2 milligram of semaglutide in the obesity space. So a step up in and of itself. Not to the level of cagrilintide or amycretin, but still a step up. Now I get to talk about osteoarthritis. And osteoarthritis is a debilitating condition in obesity. A lot of people, and we've talked about that, live with the cardiovascular risk, with the renal risk, with the liver risk. And we heard from Isabel that having heart failure with preserved ejection fraction impairs her functionality. A big proportion of patients living with obesity also have impaired functionality due to osteoarthritis. So we conducted step 9. It is an exploratory study, so a reasonably small study, 400 patients, where we compared semaglutide 2.4 milligram to placebo and investigated in a co-primary endpoint, obviously the weight loss, but then the functionality and pain associated with osteoarthritis. And we're really, really happy with what we see, because in this small study, we actually show not only a statistically significant, but a clinically very relevant decrease in what is called the WOMAC score between friends, assessing functionality and pain in these patients. So again, taking the holistic approach to obesity, just as we did in diabetes, we actually can serve the patients in the best way. And we've already talked about the results coming out of the SELECT trial, the STEP-HF trials, and combining that with the STEP 9 trial, we continue to add to the evidence pool that we have for semaglutide. My next love is obviously cagrilintide. You've seen the data a couple of times in obesity. We know that it holds great potential, at least 25% weight loss, with a safety and tolerability profile that in phase 1-2 was similar to that of Wegovy. So we get more bang for the buck, so to speak, without having to compromise on safety and tolerability. If we can show that in phase 3, that's really going to be a game changer. We also discussed the potential, obviously, on the cardiovascular system. We've seen more than additivity on some of the biomarkers for cardiovascular risk, blood pressure, dyslipidemia, but actually also inflammation. And that holds big, big potential for what CagriSema can do. We'll see the first readout from REDEFINE 1 later this year. And as you can also see in the slide, late this year. That's going to be incredibly exciting. That's our pivotal study. It's a 68 weeks study in 3,400 patients. And if I can use a proxy for future success of a molecule, it's typically how easy is it to recruit into a trial. We actually recruited these 3,400 patients several months prior to our schedule. And that obviously, again, at least in my mind, and it is a proxy, speaks to the potential of CagriSema. These patients and these physicians appear to like CagriSema. REDEFINE 2 is a type 2 diabetes study. As we've already discussed, big overlap between diabetes and obesity. Good number of patients, almost 80% of patients with type 2 diabetes have obesity. And establishing weight loss in that population is incredibly important. And as we discussed in the previous session, CagriSema appears to, in type 2 diabetes, introduce a weight loss that is second to none. So again, a key differentiator. I've talked about the cardiovascular potential of CagriSema. We're investigating that in REDEFINE 3. REDEFINE 3 is a hybrid trial in the sense that we've been allowed to investigate patients with obesity as well as patients with diabetes and obesity. So REDEFINE 3 serves not only for the obesity program, but actually also for the diabetes program. And then obviously a lot of you have put attention on REDEFINE 4, which is a head-to-head against tirzepatide. We do a similar study in the diabetes space. And again, based on what we see so far, we're really, really confident that CagriSema will show some very, very convincing data. The potential of CagriSema also warrants us to take this maybe even further. Obviously, we'll investigate obstructive sleep apnea, but we'll also specifically go into heart failure, chronic kidney disease, non-alcoholic, but also alcoholic liver disease. So additional aspirations in the diabetes space. Again, we have really, really high aspirations and high confidence in this biology. But it doesn't stop here. These days, we do both in and external innovation. Monlunabant, or INV-202, is an externally acquired asset. As Marcus alluded to, there's even a follow-on, INV-347. But right now, we are currently investigating Monlunabant in clinical trials. These are actually published data, and we can always discuss how convincing is a placebo-controlled 4% weight loss. You have to consider this is after 28 days. So when we put that into our model, we expect around 15% weight loss, and that is in a tablet form. And if we, to Marcus's point, can rule out neuropsychiatric disorders, it also appears to be very safe and tolerable. Really, really big upside. When we then also combine that with Henrik's ability to scale, because we think about that and we believe that we have a competitive edge there, this is a very, very strong offering. You've already seen these data. At the very least, amycretin has the potential of showing same efficacy and safety as CagriSema. And we have the ability to bring that to the patients in either an oral or subcutaneous format. We're currently investigating the subcutaneous format in phase 1. That will read out sometime in 2025. And then we'll look at the data and we will figure out how to go into what I would call an ambitious further development program. This is high potential. And it is something that we will investigate in a very diligent manner. I've been asked a couple of times if we will skip phase 2. I will not rule that out, but it has to be contingent on the data that we see from phase 1. And just to get it out of the way, what I want to see in phase 1 is differentiation between doses on efficacy, on safety, and on pharmacokinetics. If I see that, then we'll have that dialogue. So to sum up, it's very, very clear we're changing the outlook for obesity. Wegovy have unlocked the obesity care market, but we still see a huge unmet need and a huge need for innovation. I think we've established, both over the last couple of months, but also with more data today, that SELECT is a key differentiator. Wegovy is the only anti-obesity medication with cardiovascular and other data available to support its differentiation. And obviously a keen eye on a differentiated, competitive pipeline, and at the same time, the scalability and the supply to support that. We believe that we will continue our leadership in this space. So with that, I'll invite my co-speakers, but also Carsten, to the table to moderate Q&A.
Thank you, Martin. I see a lot of very quick hands, but just to mix things up and keep us all awake, then we'll do it slightly different this time. Now the sun is out, so we cannot use that one anymore. So now we'll start with the Q&A on commercial strategy and commercial execution. So and then after that we'll do development questions. So commercial, Martin, you are the fastest. So commercial strategy and commercial execution, Martin.
I hope my question is in the right category. But you showed the slide with of course we've seen all the strong data from SELECT and so forward, and then you go to the payers, and then they show you the slide from Capital Markets Day that only 32% of patients are on treatment after 12 months. How will you convince them to pay for something that people potentially never will experience?
So I think that goes for Camilla first, and then Doc, perhaps a comment on the 30% in the US in a supply constraints setting.
Yeah, thanks a lot. It's clear that the more we learn about the obesity treatment, the more we know that it's a serious chronic disease. So it's basically, again, back to the SELECT data saying that, of course, it's if you drop off the treatment, then don't get the benefits, and your weight will increase, and you may lose some of the longer-term positive effects on the comorbidities. So it's about that pattern. And actually, I think you know well also, Martin, that we have done the study where we, after 20 weeks, people on Wegovy and placebo, and after 20 weeks, or both on Wegovy in the first 20 weeks, we let people move on to placebo. Immediately, the change in the curve was different, and people will regain the weight. And of course, from SELECT, Martin would also say, and maybe Martin should talk to that, that it's not only the weight benefits, of course, of semaglutide that drives the cardiovascular risk reduction, but these are very important data to show that adherence to treatment is important. And we are, of course, working also on how we can support patients the best way. And maybe Doc and Mike can say something about that.
Thanks, Camilla. Doc?
Well, I would say more on the scorecard is the access today, and every major PBM has covered it, and we've had really, I'd say, encouraging dialogue with payers. Our job is to describe the value proposition, and we use data to do that and to bridge beyond just weight into other chronic conditions and disease states. So we'll continue to do that and use the data to our advantage. And then I'd say lastly, in the supply constrained world, we had intermittent stockouts, and so I have to say the stay time and the 30%, there's an asterisk to it with what we had to face last year. So as that improves over time, as we indicated it will, I think we'll see a different number.
Right. Thanks, Doc. Then we move to Seamus.
Thanks. So just one very quick question, because I'm only allowed one. The amycretin strategy as part of the commercial strategy, how important is an improved tolerability profile? And can you help us understand the percentage of patients that are actually dropping off specifically for tolerability-related reasons versus reimbursement or other dynamics? Thanks.
Thanks, Seamus. So, Camilla, will you take that? What do we see there in the
Yeah,
market?
so the majority of the drop-offs actually happen in the first 12 weeks, approximately, where we see most people dropping off for tolerability reasons. And we see that with Wegovy compared to Saxenda, I think Doc showed you the curves. There is a big difference, even there as well. So you can imagine when that happens in the beginning, then in parallel, of course, it's also the expectations to the efficacy of the treatment. How long will that continue? And people are likely to stay on to the treatment, as long as they continue to see improvement. So this part about tolerability is of course important, especially in the first phase of the treatment. But we've also learned that management by the physician to manage expectations that this is a likely, you can say, a drawback initially, that helps a lot, and people get used to it.
Thanks, Camilla. And Seamus, you asked about amycretin. So this is what we see in the market on Wegovy, and the beauty of CagriSema that we have in phase 3, as you know, is that we see additivity on weight loss, but not additivity on tolerability. So I think that's really the promise of CagriSema, and then amycretin remains to be seen in later clinical trials. Great, then we move to Pete.
Thanks, Pete Vidal, Citi. Just one question to address to Doug and Mazen. Just on the commercial footprint that you have. I know you're not going to talk about numbers, that's commercially sensitive, but in terms of being right-sized, boots on the ground, I mean, we all know the top line's going to be moving, but with all this innovation, do you really need, another sales force here, another sales force here, particularly in the US? Just I realize you can't talk to numbers, but the right sizing in terms of your current commercial footprint in both IO and US.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. Doc first, and then Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Pete. It's a rigorous process we go through every year, and we look at sizing, span and control, and what we need for each brand, and we'll continue to do that. So I'm not going to get into the specifics of our strategy, but I would say as we view life cycle management, new indications, things of that nature, we size appropriately to the opportunity.
And with regards to international operations, that's probably the last thing I'm worried about. We have a really strong footprint compared to all of our competitors, ex-US, and I think we continue to, of course, assess and continue to add, and I think we have a huge advantage over others that is not going to be the biggest problem.
Thank you, Mike. Now we move to pipeline and, of course, commercial. So, but now we open it up to pipeline, and I see Sachin being fast.
I prepped a commercial, so I might just do another commercial for that second. Sachin Jain, Bank of America. So just really big picture, as you think midterm, question I get asked very frequently, how do you think about a split of the obesity market, oral versus injectable? And within that oral, you're now thinking about two molecules at least, a biologic and a small molecule. So geographically, how are you going to position a twin oral strategy? Thank you.
Yeah, that sounds like commercial strategy. Camilla?
Yeah, so no doubt that there's a market for orals as well as injectable. Also no doubt that efficacy is really very important in this space. When it comes to how we are going to divide or think about our opportunities, it comes down to commercial tactics, I would say. So I'd rather not go into the details of that, but no doubt that we feel that across we have a very, very strong pipeline. We showed the segments earlier also, and we are going to optimize, of course, the utilization of that to help as many people as possible. And I think that's the closest I can get to that now. It's a relevant question, no doubt, but also a very competitive one.
Scalability is really in fashion these days. Yeah. So now we move to this table.
Thanks so much. Mattias Ekblom, Handelsbanken. For Martin, in light of the SELECT data, for how long can you continue to start new CV outcome trials with placebo as a control? And in a scenario where you would be asked to, would you expect your emerging obesity pipeline to be differentiated enough to be superior to Sema in such setting?
Yeah, absolutely. So honestly, not for very long. when we start to see label updates starting with Wegovy, and for the next 5 years, that's maybe where we will be, we'll have to consider what's the right comparator in this space. Specifically, vis-a-vis semaglutide, the promise of CagriSema is better weight loss, better glycemic control, but also better on markers of cardiovascular disease. So that wouldn't be a concern to us. But right now, actually, for CagriSema, our first trial will be against placebo because when we started the trial, Select was not available.
Thank you, Martin. Then we move back here.
Thank you very much. Question, please, for Doug on US prescribers. You showed some nice numbers. These are growing quite dramatically. Can you comment on the proportion of those that are specialists versus primary care? I think probably increasingly important given the huge demand and the long waiting lists that we hear for patients to see specialists. So are you yet seeing broader physician adoption?
Yeah, it's a good question. And we are seeing broader adoption as evidenced by the slide. And I would say that generally speaking, we still see 80% of the prescriptions coming from HCPs and nurse practitioners. And then the other 20%, there's a lot in between that, some specialists. We did deploy a couple years ago a cardiovascular team. We're happy we did that. And we'll continue our efforts across specialty as well as primary care, which in the end is an enormous opportunity for us in terms of that segment.
Right. Then we move here to Mark Purcell.
Thank you. Mark Purcell from Morgan Stanley. Martin, could you help us understand how you move the physician and payer audience from weight loss to outcomes? And in your CagriSema comments, you talked about looking at lower doses of CagriSema, whereas you're looking at high doses of Sema 7.2 with pivotal data later this year. So can you help us understand this sort of dose effect in terms of obviously weight, but quality of weight, CV factors, inflammation, triglycerides, etc. Thank you.
So I don't think I said lower doses for CagriSema. Currently, we are investigating 2.4 plus 2.4, and we actually see a potential if the 7.2 milligram of semaglutide pans out to go into even higher doses with CagriSema in the lifecycle management space. So we are investigating everything, but currently we see the maximum benefit on weight loss, on glycemic control, but certainly also on the cardiovascular biomarkers on the doses that we picked for phase 3, so 2.4 and 2.4. I think specifically to your first question, I think we're only allowed one question, but
and one answer.
Communication, sharing of data. We're super happy with the publications that will get out, but also more specifically the guideline updates and the regulatory updates that will entail. It will enable our medical communication, but also when we get the regulatory updates, our commercial communication.
Right. Then we move to Michael Novo.
Thanks, Michael from Nordea. A question to Doc. So we see today that Cigna is saying that you have signed, also Lilly has signed new deals around commercial access to obesity drugs, where you also have sort of a financial guarantee and a cap. So can you give a bit more flavor to that? And how does that correlate with sort of a financial guarantee likely driving higher volumes in a world where there's supply constraints?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's a good question. What I would say is we're open for business. And what that means is that we know that one stop, one shop is not going to be the answer to the amount of patients that we want to serve. Integrated solutions will be a part of that. So as you see in these partnerships, I don't want to get into those specific details, but we are working across all pairs right now on various different programs and services because we know that what we're looking for is a sustainable market over time, and it's important to us to serve as many patients as possible. So we're off to a good start. We'll continue to keep our doors open for that dialogue, and that's just another example of vertical integration or integrated solutions, I should say, that is one that we'll continue to pursue.
Thanks, Doc. Then let's move to Florent, the next table. Mike, could you pass? Sorry, thanks.
Thank you, Florence Espeles from Société Générale. A question, Martin, on SELECT. Based on data available so far, have you identified some subpopulation that would benefit the most from the product? That's something that could help, let's say, better access and better reimbursement, not only in Europe. So any color on that would be great. Thank you.
I actually think the strength of semaglutide is that as far as, and we are still looking into the data, as far as we can see, if we stratify by age, by gender, by region, by duration of whatever comorbidity, we see the same benefit with semaglutide. And most specifically, actually, if we look at BMI, so a patient with a BMI 27 to 30 has the same CV benefit as a patient with a BMI above 40.
And perhaps just adding to the response, Mike, on reimbursement in Europe vis-a-vis SELECT, what's the latest experiences in the markets?
It's going incredibly well. I just wanted to say that. Of course, we've talked to a few markets only, but I can bring news from the discussions we've had with the Swiss authorities, for example, last week. It is really about SELECT. It is really about that there is a so-called secret sauce in Wegovy that goes way above just weight loss. And that should matter. It should matter because as you get older, then you often die from some of these conditions that you speak to. You die from a kidney failure, a liver problem. You die from cardiovascular issues. And that matters more than if you have 2 kilograms more or 2 kilograms less at the time of death. And the payers are listening to that.
Great, sounds good. So unfortunately, I'll have to cut the session now.